I was sitting on a stool at the bar in a small neighborhood place near my hotel. I was in Boston, just finishing a deal that would make me penniless and allow me to do whatever I wanted. The trick was to decide how to do that and still be rich. Confused? I hope so. That would mean Roxy's lawyers would be as well. All of this came about because of what I found out about my wife. That knowledge was not something I went looking for, but it found me just the same. It was complicated to say the least, and my deal would make it even worse. Worse for her. The place was almost empty, which was one of the main reasons I picked it. The barkeep walked toward me after the only other customer in the place walked out the door. It was still early, so I knew I wasn't holding him up. He stopped in front of me, gave me the once-over, then mentioned I had been there for some time. He told me his name was Sam and asked me mine. I figured what the heck and told him, because I was impressed that he didn't look away. Good to meet you, Sam. My name is Jim Evans. Thanks for the ear and the beer. I don't want to go home tonight, and I don't want to spend the time alone in my hotel room, so this is as good a place as any, and probably better than most. If you're looking to get lucky, Jimbo, this ain't a prime place for it. Might try the sports bar down the street. He actually had the grace not to look embarrassed when he said this. Sam, take a look at me. We both know that I look like something out of a nightmare, so do you think I expect to get lucky? All I want is a couple of beers and some peace and quiet. Present company accepted, of course. Sam wiped the bar in front of me, and instead of responding, asked if I was ready for another. At my nod, he produced a tall, cold Budweiser. It was my fourth of the night, but who was counting? When he brought it, he said I must have a story to tell, and if I wanted, he'd be happy to listen. I hesitated. I was trying to come to grips with my problems, but they were very personal and I wasn't sure about sharing them with a stranger. I took the fresh bud and pushed the empty away. I was pacing myself tonight. I certainly didn't want to keep thinking the thoughts that wouldn't let me be, but I didn't want to get drunk and pass out. The bartender took the empty and put it in an empty case, then swiped the bar once more before going back to leaning and wiping glasses. I finally said, "What the heck," to myself and decided to tell him my tale. It wasn't as if he gave a hoot, but I felt better talking, and a truly disinterested party was a bonus. As I readied myself to tell him my tale, I had to admit to myself that I wasn't actually angry. That was the most surprising thing. I should be anxious, on edge, hopping out of my shoes, but I wasn't any of those things. I was just calm and cool. I guess that's what happens when your world collapses. Sam took his rag, swiped the bar in front of me, flipped the rag over his shoulder and leaned toward me. He was ready to listen as only a bartender could. My story. Well, Sam, it begins 9 years ago when I was in college. I was fresh-faced, believed in miracles and ready to grab for the brass ring. I was smart as heck, eager as the proverbial beaver and ready to make my fortune. I was working on a master's in engineering and I was in my final year. I was just filling in my schedule since I only needed credits to fill out my minors. My major was chemical engineering and I had completed all of the requirements for that and was taking some easy courses. That's when I met her. She was an education major and I shared a class with her my senior year, a math class. For me it was a credit for a minor in math. For her it was part of her major. She was failing miserably and she saw one of my papers when the prof handed them back after a quiz. I had a perfect score, of course, while hers was a 60%. I wasn't paying any attention to her as I left class, but she was right behind me. As I exited the building, trying to decide whether to head back to my apartment or go over to the student union for a Coke, she caught up to me and tugged on my sleeve. I stopped and turned around to see who it was. Seeing her almost made me run in terror. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen and I had always worshipped her from afar, so to speak. Now here she was, right in front of me and apparently wanted to talk to me. This had to be a joke, a cruel hoax to humiliate me, so I stood stock still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I expected she would do something for her friends who were probably watching, waiting for her to humiliate the guy. Then she surprised me even more. She spoke to me. "Pardon me. I'm Roxanne Bowers and I'm in your class. The one you just left." As if I didn't know that, Sam. Of course I knew that. I just couldn't remember my name or where in the heck I was. I swallowed, did it again and tried to find some tiny bit of moisture that would allow my stuck tongue to break loose from the roof of my mouth. Finally, I opened my mouth and squeaked, "I know. I'm Jim Evans. Jim. I wondered if I could buy you a Coke and ask you for a great big favor. Would that be all right?" Rather than try to speak again, I just nodded affirmatively. She began walking toward the student union and I sort of shuffled along beside her. As we walked, she started talking and telling me about herself. I listened with intense concentration so as not to miss a single word she said. I planned on repeating this conversation verbatim to myself when my right hand and I had a date later tonight. She continued all the way to the Union and I listened just as long. By the time we arrived, I knew all about her. I knew her name, where she was from, that she was an only child whose parents died in a car crash when she was 10. She was raised by an aunt and uncle who were okay but didn't really know how to care for a 10-year-old. She was on her own a lot but she was pretty independent as a result. She did okay in school and her parents left enough in an insurance policy for her to go to college. She wanted to be a teacher, sort of. Actually what she wanted was to meet some rich boy and get married and live the life of luxury. She thought that made her a horrible person but I said it wasn't too unusual for most girls to feel that way. She said she didn't have a boyfriend and couldn't take the time since school was so hard that studying took all her free time and she really did want to complete her education. We got our cokes, took a table and she finally asked me if I would tutor her in math and chemistry. She was not doing well in either and she wanted to be sure she could pass. She saw that I always got perfect scores so she decided I would be the best one to tutor her. She offered to pay me the going rate and I hesitated before agreeing. I didn't need the money for a lot of reasons, not the least being I was on a full ride with a stipend. The other thing was who I was. I didn't look any different then as I do now, Sam. I've always been homely, too skinny, too tall, too everything bad. I'm not handsome, heck, I'm not even close to good looking. My face is long and I look like a horse, which was my nickname in high school by the way. And my personality is for stuff. I clam up if I meet a girl and in social situations, I suck. As I passed puberty, I started to lose my hair and got a belly. Even though I work out a lot, it makes no difference. God gave me a body that nobody else wanted. When I met her, I didn't go out much, didn't date, wasn't in a fraternity and never left campus to go home. But with all that, and foolish as it probably was, I didn't want to discourage this opportunity. We agreed on the deal. She told me to come to her place for an hour each night during the week. I agreed. She gave me her address and phone number and we parted. She smiled at me, held my hand for an extra few seconds before turning and walking away. With her touch my blood had begun to course through my body with a heat that scared me. I remained rooted to the spot as I watched her walk. That was payment enough for me as I headed back to my room, my mind in a pink haze of happiness. Me and my right hand had a lot to do together that night. I began to teach her math my way. I think I told you that I was smart? Well, I'm sort of a genius and math was one of my first loves. I taught her tricks and showed her the neat things you could do when you understood that math was something that humans invented and it had rules. She caught on quick and soon began to find that the class was really easy when you understood the principles. Her grades picked up and she did well the remainder of the course. Next we took on chemistry. This was basic chemistry and I simply had her memorize the structures, name scheme, explain the atomic structure and how reactions could be balanced and she began to slowly lose her fear of the unknown. While she didn't do as well in chemistry as she did in math, she still passed with ease. During this time, we began to talk about ourselves and the things we wanted out of life. I found her dreams to be rather simple. She wanted to be taken care of and she liked the things life could offer. She saw teaching only as a means to allow herself to spend as little time working as possible and she hoped to fall in love with a rich man. She wanted freedom to travel and meet people. She was actually very shallow as a person, but I didn't care. The one thing that surprised me was that she didn't seem to realize how beautiful she was. She seemed to think that she was pretty enough but not very smart and that turned guys off. Naive? I would guess. I finally told her about myself, my ambitions to be the best at whatever I tried and my own background. I was the only son of a self-made millionaire. Dad had invented several self-contained power sources that could be used to provide portable power for all kinds of vehicles. He had patented his ideas and was the owner of Evans Industrial Fabrications, a large factory near Toledo that produced power sources for the military. He had several contracts that were good for many more years and each provided a nice profit. Since Dad was always working, Mom raised me and was always around to make sure my world was in control and I was safe. She was also very bright and showed me the value of an education. She homeschooled me until high school and then when my grades were top of the class, she helped me gain a full scholarship to Ohio State. I inherited my brains from both Mom and Dad. They were both very bright and Dad was a genius. The one problem was that my dad was butt ugly, and so was Mom. It seems they were attracted to each other since no one else would give them the time of day, which was fine by them. They were in love and it was solid and real. I was raised in that world, surrounded by love, and it made me a better man and human being. However, along with Dad's brains, I also inherited his looks and Mom's didn't help out any either. To say I was ugly was an understatement. Always had been and I knew it. But hey, as the Bible says, He gives and He takes away. I was content with what I was. My world was always solidly in control thanks to Mom and Dad. I had no thoughts of anything but my education, and I pursued it with total commitment. I was happy and I was content until a drunk driver took them both away from me. In one drunken act, he destroyed my safe and secure world and forced me out into the light of chaos which was life without them. I was 19 at the time and I had just started college, but with this disaster, I dropped out and went back home. It hit me hard, Sam. Harder than anything else in my entire life. They were my world, my source of love and laughter. When they left this earth, so did most of my will to live. I thought about following them, but, with time, I came to understand that chance rules and we have no choice but to live with it. So, I did. Since Dad had no will, and Mom's will was all we had to go by, hers took precedence and I inherited everything. I was suddenly forced to take control of my father's business interests and try to understand what he did all his life. He had years to grow into what he became. I had days, weeks, to do the same. Well, Sam, I managed and found I had a knack for knowing what to do and when the best time to do it was. I remembered who was who and whom Dad trusted, and I worked with those people until I had the business under full control. I worked my behind off for almost 4 years until I felt things were beginning to make sense. Once I was satisfied that things could run without my constant supervision, I appointed one of the longtime managers to run things for me. Dad trusted him and so did I. That left me time to go back to college. Believe it or not, Sam, I desperately wanted to complete my degree. I was rich then, but it made no difference. Education was my goal and I never failed to achieve the goals I set for myself. My full scholarship was still in effect, so I returned to Ohio State and began my quest for a degree. I was now 25, with an income that guaranteed I would never have to work another day in my life. But Sam, that wasn't enough for me. My goal was to be the best and I needed what college could teach me. Even though I was way ahead of everyone else, I took my time and studied all I could while I finished my degrees. I was working on a master's by then. I also used the labs and the equipment at Ohio State to work on some things of my own. I had several patents by the time I graduated. Education was like the fuel that fired my creative engines. That was my life until that final year when I met Roxy. That began the greatest time of my life. She and I worked together to get her grades up, and while doing it, we sort of began to see each other socially as well. I was constantly surprised when she would call me on the phone just to talk and share her day. I listened to every word she spoke and filed it all away in that place in my heart I kept for just her. I was constantly on the alert for that innuendo, that uncontrolled remark that would indicate she felt as everyone else did, I was too ugly. But it never came and I began to believe that to her, it didn't matter. I convinced myself. She changed my life that final year in college. After her, Sam, I could never again face the prospect of being alone. As the year progressed, I finally asked her out on a real date and to my surprise, she accepted. We went to dinner, a movie where she let me hold her hand, and then I walked her back to her dorm. At the door, she reached up and kissed my cheek before slipping in the door. That was the beginning of a dream for me. We went everywhere together, and when the inevitable looks came when people saw her with me, she simply ignored them. To my surprise, I don't think she even noticed them. How rare was that? We dated all that year, and just before graduation I decided to ask her to marry me. It would mean she would continue her education, but I would buy a place in Columbus and she could live at home with me and I could help her as much as before. I made up a plan and memorized all the questions she might have when I asked her. I even considered that she might not want to marry me since she was so beautiful and I was what I was. She might just want to remain friends. But she had never mentioned anything like that before, and I had the courage to think that she could overlook that. In my heart, I knew that might be the deal breaker, but I had to try. That was who I was. I always went for it regardless of the risks. Sam, can you imagine my surprise when she said yes when I proposed? I mean, for heaven's sake. Look at me and then look at her. She's hot. She's everything I'm not. She's beautiful, built like a brick shithouse, a natural blonde with blue eyes that you simply want to dive into, and a personality that makes everyone love her. Me, I'm a nerd, a clod, but ugly with a homely face and a body that needs work. Most people's eyes just roll over in their heads when I start to speak. Look at you, for Christ's sake. It's all you can do just to pay attention when I order a beer. Have to ask me twice just to be sure you even heard me. Sam was wiping that glass in his hand as if he had to rid it of some infestation. He was leaning toward me, trying to pay attention, but you could see it was hard. His eyes tended to wander away every few seconds before sliding back to meet mine. The place was empty, but it was still an hour and a half to closing. He had little choice but to stay close. To make his job easier, and to ensure he might give me a few more minutes before becoming terminally bored to death, I showed him her picture. It was the one I kept in my wallet, the one of her in a bikini on the beach during our honeymoon. I was also in the picture, but few people even noticed that. I watched as his eyebrows rose and his mouth fell open. Holy moly! Is that your wife? She's flipping incredible. You lucky fellow. He had trouble keeping his hands on the glass, wanting to grab the picture for himself. Not going to happen. I was used to that reaction. Yeah, that's her. That's my lovely wife. My life partner. The woman of my dreams. Actually, make that nightmares. She's a flipping slut and soon-to-be ex-wife. When I'm finally divorced, I'll give you her number. He was no longer fixated on the picture, the idea of having her number and that she was a slut more important, so I put it away again and watched as his eyes slowly clouded over as I once again began to talk. So, now that you know what she looks like, and the proof of what I am is right here in front of you, I see that you know where this is heading, Sam. Of course, I treated her like a princess and let her have anything she wanted. I bought her a car, more clothes than she could ever wear, diamonds, fur coats, anything at all she expressed a desire for. And I never tried to prevent her from doing whatever she felt like. She did very little at first, always home in the evening when I came in, always had dinner on the table and cold beer waiting when I came in the door. And at bedtime, the was incredible. She couldn't do enough for me. Anything I asked, she did. And she allowed me to do anything to her I wanted. She told me that she never knew it could be so good. And I believed her, Sam. We shared everything. It was wonderful. It was 3 years later, and after trying for some time to have a child, we went to see a fertility specialist. We found we couldn't have children. It was her, so the doctor said, and that made her very unhappy. I told her we could adopt, select any child she wanted, but she wanted none of that. After that, she began to withdraw from me, only not physically. Not then at least. Sex was still as good as ever, but she seemed to withdraw from me in other ways. We stopped laughing together, going out less, spending time together, and she seemed uninterested in my work. She simply stopped caring about my life in general. I tried on several occasions to talk to her about it, but she claimed nothing was wrong. She would pretend things were back to normal, but within a day or two it was the same as before. What bothered me the most was why she would be angry at me for something that wasn't her fault. I never blamed her, never mentioned that it was too bad we couldn't have our own child. I told her time and time again that I loved her, and not being able to have children didn't change that. She seemed as if she accepted that, but she continued to withdraw from me. And she began to find places to go and things to do that kept her out until late in the evenings. I was not happy with that, and I did put my foot down, promising her that if she couldn't be home in the evenings to be with me, we had a problem that would have to be dealt with. She slowed her behavior some, but not completely. Then the thing started to slow down. It happened so slow that I never noticed until one day I couldn't remember the last time we made love. When I mentioned that to her, she became angry and accused me of trying to remind her of her sterility. We had an awful row and nothing I said could calm her down. She was yelling and crying and I had no idea what to do. It ended with us not speaking, and then soon after that, she started sleeping in the spare room and our love life didn't exist. Then all of a sudden, things around the house began to change again. She started laughing again, she took more time fixing meals, she began to want to spend time with me in the evenings, and she began to ask about my work. It was almost like it used to be in the bedroom, and she moved back into our bed. The love was again hot and as often as I liked. But her interest in my work and my business increased until I became concerned. I knew her interest up to then had only been concerned with how much money I was bringing home and what she could buy with it. Now, she wanted to know more, how I deposited the money into our accounts, how I got the money if I was the owner of the plant that supplied it, and other questions the old Roxanne would never worry about. Now Sam, I told you I was very smart, a genius to be honest. It took me about a heartbeat to put 2 and 2 together and come up with 100. Consider as I did, no love, then back on again, a change in behavior, questions about the plant and where the money came from, treating me like a king. Make you wonder, Sam? Make you think something was rotten in Denmark? Well, it did make me think, and it took me all of 2 seconds to come to a conclusion. My beautiful wife was cheating on me and had decided to try to skim what she could from me without making me suspicious. Maybe she had more planned, but this was enough to get my juices flowing. Someone who looks like me is always ready to accept that someone else may try to suck up to me for my money. If someone was nice to me, I questioned it. Roxanne's interest in me had always surprised me, but I did understand that I was what she always wanted, someone to take care of her and provide her with all the money she needed. That she was able to put aside my looks was just a bonus, or so I convinced myself when we were married. Now, I had to accept that all she wanted was my money, she didn't want me any longer. I had to admit, I had always loved her for accepting me, but that was before she decided to betray me. Now, while I still loved her as much as before, I was saddened to know she was no different than everyone else I had met over the years. I just had to be thankful for the time I had with her. She was beautiful and everything any man could ever hope for. I had her for almost 5 years, 4.5 of them good ones, but now it was over. It took me almost a month to get over it, Sam. It hurt at first, the anger began to build and I screamed at the fates that made me who I was. Night after night I lay in bed and asked God why he gave me hope and then took it away. It was cruel and inhuman. He took my mother and father and left me to survive. Now he was taking Roxanne. But finally, the man I was took charge and the heartache began to fade. One day, after waking from a restless sleep filled with questions and self-pity, I simply gave up. I had been a fool and I had deluded myself into thinking that someone like her could actually love me for who I was. Fine. I would do what I had to do. I won't bore you with the details, Sam. Just know that I used one of my own inventions, combined with one of Dad's power supply sources to find out just what she had going. Everything she said or did during the time I left for work and the time she or I came home was recorded and stored in a small memory cube, no bigger than a pack of matches. I placed it inside her purse, the one she never left home without, sewed inside the lining where she would never feel it. It had a range of 100 feet in any direction even with the purse closed. I had invented it to go with one of the power sources we manufactured for use in satellites. It would take input from any number of devices, including a miniature microphone. Size and weight were critical parameters, so this one was as small and as light as our capabilities could make it. And that was damned small. All I had to do when she came home was go to my laptop, power up, activate a program which sent a query signal to the small self-contained device in her purse, which then downloaded all of its data to my computer. Took all of 10 seconds to finish. Wiped the drive and made it ready to collect again until the next download. It worked perfectly and I was in business. She had no clue that I could do this or that I would ever question her activities. Her life with me had convinced her that she was so beautiful she could get what she wanted from any man she met during her privileged life. I was no exception, or so she thought. Too bad for her, my experience was just the opposite. I had to work, struggle, or beg for what I wanted. Humiliation was no stranger to me. I was a lot tougher than she was. I could accept the pain I knew was coming. I had become used to pain during my early years. The truth was exactly as I suspected. She was seeing a guy named Roy during the afternoons when I was at work. She met him 1 or 2 times a week, never at the house, always at his place. Since the download also gave me the GPS coordinates of every place she stopped for more than 30 minutes, I could combine that with the voice data to determine where he lived. My computer gave me the address and I did a reverse search with Google to determine it was an apartment building. I listened to the voice download and what I heard was enough to confirm my worst fears. She and this Roy were having it, and it sounded like they did it several times. At first, it was difficult to listen to, knowing it was my wife that was making those sounds. But the thing I noticed later was that while Roxy met him 1 or 2 times a week, over the 6-week period I listened in, they only had it twice. The other strange thing was that when she was talking and saying things like yes, or harder, she didn't sound like she did when we were together. I have to admit, when Roxy and I made love, she was quite vocal. We were always reluctant to have it when we had visitors since she was very, very loud. I listened to the voices again and finally came to the conclusion that Roxy was withholding it as much as possible, and then when she did give in, faking it with this Roy guy. Which then led to the question of why she was having it with someone when it obviously wasn't satisfactory to her. Why was she cheating on me with someone who couldn't satisfy her? I had no answer. Genius or no genius, I couldn't figure that one out. But it made no difference. She was cheating and that was that. Over the next 2 weeks, I located the apartment, found out Roy's last name was Baldwin and that he was a lawyer with First National Bank and Trust, a bank I dealt with for most of my business. And finally I found out that he had the numbers of my company accounts. He told Roxy that he had used an accountant friend of his to open a bogus account under my company name using the access number that he controlled. You see, Sam, he could transfer funds from the other accounts to the bogus one without my knowledge, since if an audit of my accounts were made, the totals would remain constant. Now I understood Sam. She had decided to use Roy as her weapon to take my money and leave me high and dry. The thing was her tool, and she knew that Roy could deny her nothing if she offered him what all men desired. When they were ready, he would empty my accounts into the bogus one and then withdraw those funds. I understood immediately what he meant, and I knew he could do exactly what he claimed. And my problem was that Roxy seemed to be not only aware of it, she was part of it. Her betrayal was complete. At home, I worked hard to keep my knowledge of Roxy's betrayal from her, but brilliance does not bestow indifference, Sam. She continued to try to keep up appearances, but I became withdrawn anyway. I was not socially adept, and my broken heart was all too painful to allow me to pretend to be content and happy. My behavior was getting to her, and I saw her frowning more and more. She questioned me about it, but I just told her I was tired, and work was getting me down. I also mentioned that business was not going well and that things might begin to slow down. I knew she was becoming worried and I assumed her guilt was making her question my behavior. She became a tiger in the bedroom and honestly, it almost made me crazy. It was amazing, Sam, how much it seemed that she really cared. She was very good. My throat closed up then with the emotions I thought I had under control. To give me time, I stopped for a minute, held up my empty bud and Sam took it and got another cold one. He made his inevitable swipe over the bar, sat the new one down on a clean paper coaster and took up his towel and another spotless glass to polish. He looked thoughtful for a second and finally looked up at me to ask a question. This surprised me since I thought he was just tuning me out as I droned on and on. Let me ask you, Jimbo. Why would she have it with a guy who didn't get her off, and still have it with you who did? And why did she turn off the tap at home, and then turn it back on? That don't make no sense to me. Something's wrong about that whole thing. Something's fishy. I was pleased. He picked up on it, so he was really listening. I wanted to hug him in delight but remembered that socially, one didn't hug one's bartender. But in the mood I was in, his interest was like a burst of sunshine. I loved this guy. I really did. Maybe I could see that he got a nice little bonus at the end of the day. Good question, Sam. One that I asked myself over and over. Why would she screw everything up and let this guy F her when she didn't even enjoy it? Better yet, why continue to do it with me who could get her off like crazy? Good question, yes sir, a damn good question. And I'll tell you the answer. First off, remember what I told you was Roxy's goal in life? It was to be taken care of and to have everything she wanted. She hadn't taught a single day since we were married. She was a professional shopper, every day something new. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, lingerie, perfume, you name it. She was insatiable. Never enough. And I never denied her anything. Never. But that wasn't good enough. Now here's the strange part. When she found out she couldn't have kids, Roxy began to wonder how I really felt. Even though I told her it was fine and that we could adopt, she didn't believe me. Can you beat that? She thought I was just stringing her along. Just until I could find someone else who would marry a freak like me and give me babies. She convinced herself that I was going to dump her. Now Sam, think about that. Someone as beautiful as Roxanne thought that someone as ugly as me, a born loser in the looks department, would dump someone like her. Oh, I see the raised eyebrows, the smirk on your face. You think I'm bullshitting you, don't you? But it's true. I heard her tell several of her girlfriends when they were out shopping. She believed I was going to divorce her as soon as it was confirmed that my girlfriend was pregnant. My girlfriend Sam. How about that? And where did she get that idea? Why, from our friend, the lawyer. He told her that I had contacted him to ask about divorce and what it might cost me. He said I wanted to leave her with nothing. Huh. Now we know why she was F him. Simple, sweet, but wrong. I had to stop for a minute as the tears welled up and then began to drop down my cheek and off my chin. I laid my head down on the bar and just cried. It was still too raw, the pain and the loss. Sam, bless his heart, didn't say anything while I lost my dignity in front of him. He just took the half-empty bud and replaced it with another. I heard someone come up to the bar and heard Sam tell them to F off, but I couldn't look up. I finally got some control and straightened back up. Sorry about that, Sam. Please, excuse my display. I took the offered paper towel and wiped my face, trying for some self-pride. It was hard, so damned hard to say it out loud. But, it was true. No need to apologize, Jimbo. Guys lose it in here all the time. At least, you got a damn good reason. I'd cry too if I lost someone like her. So, go on. You were telling me why she was screwing S-head. Yeah, sorry. Well, anyway, the thought of me divorcing her was too much. She was afraid of losing all she had, the money, the cars, the clothes, you name it. She loved all that crap, apparently more than she loved me. Oh, I think I always suspected that, but now it was official. When I began to tap her conversations, I overheard one that she had with an accountant friend of hers. She told Roxy to make sure she could identify all my accounts, place all the money, be sure when I divorced her that she knew where all the bodies were buried. Roxy heard her and she certainly took it to heart. Now back to Roy at the bank. He was the lawyer that told her about my intention to divorce her. He had been waiting once he set the hook in her mouth. After talking to her accountant friend, she went back to the bank and Roy. He was waiting for her, and when he told her that he handled all my accounts, he put it into her head that he was the one she needed to be with. She began to work on him, to seduce him. That was what she was trying to do, and of course, she didn't know that he was just letting her think it was working, just using her. Of course, he reluctantly agreed with the promise of it. That's when she cut me off in the bedroom and began to become more friendly. Up till then, she was just trying to ignore me, to make the divorce harder for me. That's what she thought. She began to meet him after work for coffee, then for a drink or two. Finally she began to intimate that she was willing to meet him for more. It took her almost 2 months, all the time he was playing hard to get, but she finally got him to invite her to his apartment and they did it. I worked this out after I began to tape them. She was trying to convince him that she was attracted to him and that they could run away together if he could get a lot of my money. She worked on him, especially right after it. He quickly agreed and set up the bogus account. She had him hooked. And he hooked her. What a couple of dummies. So, she didn't even like the thing with him? It was just to get him to do what she wanted? And all the time he was just screwing with her. She F him for the money. Shit, Jimbo. That makes her a very high-priced whore in my book. Beautiful, but still a warehouse. You got it, Sam. A beautiful high-priced WH who wanted to take more than money from me. She took my heart and tore it to shreds and I don't know why. Even if she believed I was going to divorce her, I would have given her more than enough to make her life pleasant. More than enough. God, how could she even think of me that way? Sam patted me on the shoulder, told me it was getting close to closing and that I should have a cup of coffee before I left. He was right and I took it when he brought it. I thought later that it was one of the kindest things anyone had done for me in a while. Good old Sam. A good heart and a good ear. One that actually listened to me. I finished my coffee, cleaned up in the dirty restroom and came back to say goodbye. When I left, Sam was $200 richer. Cheaper than therapy. I walked the short walk back to my hotel. I checked at the desk and found a few messages for me. One was from my attorney. It just said that the papers were drafted and we could sign them in the morning. A second was from Roxy and wanted me to call. There were 3 more, all from her and each one asked me to call her. I tore them up and kept the one from my attorney. I took the elevator up to my room and washed my face to rid it of the slightly sticky mess left from the tears. I sat down at the desk and looked at the phone. I reached for it 3 times before I finally convinced myself that there was no use in calling. I turned off the light and lay down. The following morning, the phone woke me from a disturbed sleep. I answered it without thinking. It was Roxy. I considered not saying anything but I couldn't do that, not even to her. I listened. Jimmy? Jimmy, why haven't you returned my calls? What's going on, Jim? I don't like it when you don't call me and let me know you're okay. I was waiting for your call last night when you got in. You didn't call. I waited all evening. I left messages but you didn't call. Jimmy, what's wrong? I thought about just trying to lie my way out of it and postpone everything until I got home. My attorney advised me to do that. My brain told me to do that. My conscience even told me to do that. So, what did I do? You guessed it. I listened to my broken heart and decided to lessen my pain by giving her something to worry about. I didn't know where to call you, Roxy. I didn't know if I should call you at Roy's place or at home where you might be with him. I just didn't know, so I didn't call. I heard the gasp of breath, then a loud scream. I listened, but heard what sounded like the phone being dropped. I listened and heard nothing more. I hung the phone up and sat, trying to get my breath. My chest was tight, my breathing was rapid and shallow and I was in a full-blown anxiety attack. It felt like I was going to die. A heart attack. But I was not so lucky. I recovered. I quickly took a shower, dressed and put in a call to Floyd, my attorney. He was already awake and taking a final look at the papers. He said he would meet me downstairs in a few minutes and we would call the man we were here to meet. He sounded quite pleased with himself, so that made me happy as well. Floyd happy always meant a lot of money for me. With that thought, I went downstairs and got myself some breakfast. When Floyd joined me I was already leaning back with a cup of hot, strong coffee and feeling pretty good. We drove over to the office of the gentleman we were talking to and within an hour, we had concluded the sale of 49% of Evans Industrial Fabrications to Harrison Powers Investments, and appointed a new president and CEO of the company. I was still the owner of 51%, controlling interest, but I had given the new president my written approval to operate as he saw fit and put the 51% into a blind account for a period of 5 years. In other words, I would have no control over that 51% for that period. In addition, I had signed a contract not to sell my share for a period of no less than 6 or more than 10 years. For the 49% I sold, I would receive a royalty each and every month, the amount to be paid into a closed account. The payments were to be deferred for 5 years. In other words, I no longer collected a salary as CEO, I had no income from the sale of the operations for at least 5 years, I couldn't liquidate my share of the company for at least that long, and I had transferred 49% ownership and all operating accounts into the new CEO's name, and the transfer of those funds had been completed last night. The remaining 51% was moved into that same closed account. Roy Baldwin and First National Bank and Trust were no longer in possession of those funds. To make sure I was fair, Floyd took what we had in our personal accounts when I left and split it in half. He left half in the account that he left open and that Roxy had access to and put the rest into a separate account for me. After that was gone, what was I going to do for money for the next 5 years? Good question. I decided that I could probably do quite well for myself if I just went out on my own. I knew people, knew who needed my expertise and who was willing to hire me on a job-to-job basis. My income, if anyone checked for the purposes of a divorce, was effectively zero, but my earning potential was enormous. How about that? I was willing to bet that for Roxanne, the potential was too far in the future to satisfy her immediate greed. Wasn't that a kick in the pants? And if any divorce agreement directed that I share my holdings and my earnings with her, my earnings would be very small indeed. Just enough to allow me to survive. And my holdings were tied up legally. No way to undo that. Floyd and I headed back to the hotel to check out. He was heading home to Columbus while I had no destination in mind. I just wanted to go away, anywhere I could forget the pain of losing Roxanne. For all she did to me, for all the pain and the heartache, the time she gave me was more than I could ever have hoped for. Did she ever love me? I wasn't sure. I could, however, pretend that she had and that we had shared some good years together. Had she been able to have a child, things might still be the same as before. In my room, the light indicating a message was flashing and I assumed it was from Roxy. I sat there staring at it, trying to decide if I should answer it. I finally had no choice. I had always had a driving curiosity about everything. I was curious how Roxy would deal with this one. All her plans and all her scheming was for naught. The money was gone, and there was no way for her to get any more. It was all gone now. That alone made me want to see what she would say. I picked up the phone and the desk gave me the message, "Jim, please call me as soon as you get in. Roxy." According to the desk clerk, they had taken 5 messages, all the same, before asking her to stop calling. She didn't, and they had reported her to the phone company. The calls continued. I held my head in my hands, trying to calm my racing heart. After everything she did, I couldn't stop loving her. That was my problem. I was so used to being the class joke, the butt of cruel and vicious words, the freak that everyone tried not to stare at. Roxy changed all that and made it inconsequential for almost 5 years. Years when I didn't care what others thought. Roxy loved me. Or so I believed. But true or not, I believed it. And it mattered. It really mattered. For that, I owed her. I called home and Roxy answered on the first ring. "Hello? Jim, is that you? Please tell me it's you." Her voice was strained and not very clear. She had apparently been crying and her throat was raw. That was not unusual for her. She had a deep voice normally and she sounded even sexier when she was distressed. "Yeah, Roxy, it's me. Your joke of a husband. The freak show. What do you want? Jim, please come home. We need to talk. I need to see you and talk to you and try to explain. Please Jim, if you love me, please come home." That's a joke. If I love you. Of course I love you. How could I not? I've loved you since the first moment I saw you in that class in college. That's why this hurts so bad. I loved you with all my heart and you and your lover betrayed me for nothing but money. That's all I ever meant to you, wasn't it? Just a meal ticket and a free ride. How you must have hated having to look at me every day. How you must have laughed to yourself every time we made love, thinking that I was so dumb to believe someone like you could ever love someone like me. No. 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 You have to come home and let me talk to you. Jim, please. I don't care now. You can hate me all you want, but you have to come home to me. You have to. You don't understand. You're wrong. Wrong. The only thing I did wrong was convince myself that you really cared for me. But now I know it was just for what I could give you. All those things I bought you were just things. You could have anything you wanted if you had just stayed with me. But I guess it was too much finally. Having to pretend to love me, to accept me, to make love to me. Hell, you finally couldn't stomach that any longer, you just stopped having it with me. I guess that was a big load off your shoulders, wasn't it? Not having to sleep with me anymore until you thought that I might get suspicious. That's why you started up again, wasn't it? No. That's not true. You don't understand, Jim. You've got it all wrong. Please come home. I want you here where I can talk to you face to face. Please Jim, please. Face to face. What a joke. How could you look me in the eye and pretend that you loved me? God, how you must have hated to do that. How it must have made you sick. But you were good, I have to hand it to you. You took me for a ride, and what a ride it was. But here's the joke, Roxy. I loved you and I loved it, and I'll never forget the time you gave me. Even if it was a lie, I'll still remember it and I'll smile. For that, thank you. I hung up and pulled the line from the wall. I was done with her. It hurt too much to continue with it, so I was done. I decided to stay one more night while I decided where I wanted to go. I had enough money left in my wallet to last me for at least a week if I checked out of this place and found a studio apartment somewhere not too upscale. I decided to head back to the bar where Sam worked and see if he would like to talk some more. Hell, I had nothing better to do. Sam wasn't on duty yet, so I decided to have a couple of beers and then pull up some places on my computer and pick one. I took a notebook with me and sat in one of the booths making a list of the people I knew and where they were located. It was turning out to be quite a list too. I was amazed at the number of people I knew and especially the ones I considered friends. It made me feel proud that I had made so many contacts. As I ordered a second beer, I pulled out my laptop and logged on to the internet. Strange that even a cheap bar like this one would have wireless. I checked my email and found several new messages, all from Roxy. Since when had she become so familiar with email? She even had her own address. News to me. But apparently there was a lot about Roxy that I hadn't known. Her contempt for me for one. Her cheating for another. Finally, her apparent need for money. I opened the first couple to find they were all the same. "Jim, please come home. I can explain." Sure she could. It would sound something like this: "Dear Jim, I just wanted money and I was willing to ignore your ugly face and body and pretend." Isn't that worth something? Actually yes, it was. And I had given her everything I could. Anything she asked for I gave her. But that wasn't enough. She wanted it all and without me. I deleted all but the last one. I opened that one just for kicks and got a surprise. It was longer, more detailed. "Jim, I know what you think and you are probably right. Not about how I felt about you. There you are so very wrong. I loved you at first sight too. That first day we met. You were so sweet, so honest, and so willing to help me. I fell in love with you that day and never fell out of love. I only saw your inner beauty, your soul. Nothing about your face bothered me ever. I saw only the man I loved and he was beautiful. But you are wrong about the money. I don't want your money. I want you. Roy was a mistake and one I regret. I know now that he was using me to get into your accounts. I gave him the information he asked for because he convinced me that you had talked to him about divorcing me and leaving me with nothing. I didn't care about the money, but I hoped that if I helped him, you wouldn't have enough money to leave me for someone else. The thing was just to get him to trust me. I never enjoyed it, you have to believe that. It was just a thing I did to make him trust me. You probably never believed that you are a wonderful lover. You told me you never had it before we were married. Well, I did, and no one compared to you. I always told you that, but it seems you never believed me. It's funny now that I think it that apparently you never believed the things I told you, that I loved you, that I didn't care about your looks, that your money only made it easy for me to be beautiful for you. You were so insecure and I never knew it. I just believed that you loved me and I loved you. But maybe that's only fair. I didn't believe you when you told me you didn't care about not having children. I thought you wanted our children, and when I found out I couldn't give them to you, I went sort of crazy. Jim, please come home and let me talk to you. If you want to divorce me afterwards, I'll not contest it. I'll ask for nothing but what I brought into our life together. You can keep everything else. Even the clothes and shoes and jewelry that I wore to make you proud of me. They mean nothing to me without you. I need you to believe that. You have to believe that. Please come home. Roxy. I read that one several times. Could any of it be true? Could she really mean any of it? The more I thought about it, the more I believed she was still trying to con me. To make me come back so she could use her beauty to win me back. Now that I had taken away all of her money, she wanted me back. That had to be it. I was still thinking about that when Sam came in. I was so wrapped up in my thoughts that I was startled when he came over, sat down in the chair across from me and waited until I noticed him. I looked up in surprise when he cleared his throat. Ijimbu. Back again? I see you're using the internet connection they put in last month. Damned if I don't think you're the first and the only one so far. Our clientele ain't much on that stuff, if you know what I mean. And hey, how'd it go today? If I remember right, you had a bunch of plans to put in place today to screw the bee. Am I right? You're right, Sam, and you have a good memory. I'm surprised that you remembered what we talked about. Most people put me out of their minds as soon as they walk away. I'm easy to forget. You sell yourself short, Jimbo. Maybe you look like crap, but you're an interesting guy. And hell, most of us ain't that good looking, and I know for a fact that some of the guys who come in here are either so ugly, so stupid, or so mean they can't get more than a cheap-ass hooker to go to bed with them. So, consider yourself a lucky man. You had a class act piece of ass for a lot of years. I considered what Sam said and then made a decision. I pushed the laptop toward him and turned it so he could read the open email from Roxy. Read this, Sam. Tell me what you think. And for the record, as of today, I'm broke. I don't have in the bank and won't for many years to come. Roxy has all she's going to get already, and I haven't even divorced her. Remember, I'm pretty damned smart and she made me mad, so the money is tied up so tight. she and an army of lawyers can't get at it. Don't even think about asking for your tip back, Jimbo. I spent that already. Sam laughed but pulled the laptop toward him and began to read. I watched him as his eyes tracked the lines she wrote. He read it through, went back and reread it twice more before pushing it back toward me. Damn, Jimbo. I don't know her at all except what you told me, but that there gives me pause. She sounds real sincere. Do you think there's any way she could mean what she's saying? That is the question, isn't it, Sam? That is the million-dollar question. How the hell do I know? All my life I've been defensive, suspicious of anyone who was even nice to me. I waited to see who was going to spring the trap, the one that would humiliate me once more. Even when I first met Roxy, I waited for her to make a fool of me. It never happened and I came to trust her. For the first time in my life, I trusted someone. After my parents died, I never expected to find anyone like that again. But she came into my life. Sam, all I know is that for almost 5 years, I was normal. I had someone who loved me for who I was. Oh, I suspected that my money was what she wanted, but even with that, she seemed to really love me. I figured it was a good trade-off. I provided her with the money to buy those things she seemed to want and need. She provided the home and the sanctuary I needed where I could be like everyone else. I had a home, a wife, and all that meant. I was truly blessed. Well, Jimbo, if it was me, I'd give it a shot. What's the worst that can happen? You're broke, the money's out of the picture, so she's up shit creek without a paddle. She can't take anything in the divorce and you don't have anything to give her if she stays. And you've already convinced yourself that it's over, so what do you have to lose? I thought about that and decided Sam had a point. He was exactly right. All that I suspected Roxy wanted was gone. It would be at least 5 more years before I had anything again. I couldn't afford to keep our house, our cars, anything we owned. It would all have to be in foreclosure and sold to pay the debts. Even a lawsuit couldn't break the papers I signed today. Floyd had spent a large sum of my money to make it so. I pulled the laptop close, hit reply on Roxy's email and began typing. Roxy, I've taken steps to make my money not an issue anymore. Regardless of what happens, my money is gone, not available to you and your lawyers. You can sue me for support, for anything you want, but you'll get nothing. I promise you that is true. I don't know how I can believe anything you tell me now. You've finally met all my expectations. You deny that, but the facts don't support you. You were able to successfully fool me for years, so I have little doubt you can still do so. But you did give me almost 5 wonderful years before you took it away. For that reason alone, I'll give you 1 hour to tell me in person why you broke my heart. I'll be home tomorrow at 6 o'clock. I'll listen to anything you want to say at that time. Jim. I watched the screen, stupidly waiting for a response before telling myself she wouldn't be sitting alone waiting for my reply. No sooner had I convinced myself of that when I received notice of an incoming email. It was from Roxy. Jim, please hurry. I'll be waiting. All my love, Roxy. I closed the laptop and went up to the bar where Sam was still wiping those dirty glasses. I briefly wondered how they got so dirty when the bar seemed to be so empty most of the time. As before, I spent the evening in conversation with Sam and he and I developed a sort of friendship. At least he would remember me. After all, I was sort of memorable in the ugly sort of way. I went back to my room that evening and slept the sleep of the just. My world had changed in the last few days, but I had handled the change and I was right where I wanted to be. Tomorrow was the first day of the rest of my life. I flew home from Boston and went into work the next morning to say goodbye to a lot of good people. Dad had hired most of them, groomed most, guided some and chided some. I felt that I had gained their respect and their trust after I took over, which was something many never received. I explained that the company was still solid and would continue. I told them that things would be different but not to fear. I had conditions in place that would protect them for those critical 5 years. They listened, had some doubts but went back to work with some confidence. That was important to me, that they trusted me. I spent the remainder of the day on the phone talking with people I knew all around the world, people that would most likely want to use my talents for their own purposes. By 4 that afternoon, I had appointments with 2 gentlemen in Punta Arenas, Costa Rica. It was on the coast in the Gulf of Nicoya, close to the Pacific, and promised simple accommodations for the lone American. They would have tickets awaiting me by noon tomorrow. Now that I was set for my own future, I had to consider what to do about Roxy. Divorce was the simplest option. Now that my money was tied up, she would get very little in any suit she chose to file. If I gave her everything that I now had, she would get the house, the cars, all her clothing and jewelry. Everything that she seemed to need and love. It was fair payment for the best 5 years of my life. At least since my parents were taken from me. At 6, I pulled into the driveway of what was once our home. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Roxy opened the door almost as soon as my hand hit the door and stood back to allow me to enter. I did, and she shut the door behind me, moving quickly around to stand in front of me. How do I describe Roxy? How do I describe what, to me, was the most beautiful woman in the world? I had never seen her through any other eyes than mine, a man smitten with her beauty. I knew she was beautiful. I had the opinions of others who often doubted my claim of ownership. That she was perfect in almost every detail was also verified by others. She was tall, at least for a woman. She had a body that made men drool and women curse. Her face was right out of a Michelangelo portrait, a smile that promised the world, a look that assured it could be yours, and eyes that took your breath away. All this had once been mine. And all this had been my assurance that I was worthy of something, at least in her eyes. And now she stood in front of me, none of those characteristics in evidence. What I saw was a simple woman, one who was lost, uncertain of her place, and hurting inside. Yes, I could see that. I had always been able to see what was underneath. That was both my curse and my gift. I thought I knew all those years that she did love me, that she never considered me in any way than as her husband. That was what destroyed me in the end. That I had always believed I could see her truth. Now, maybe what I saw was not what I believed. Maybe this was an act, designed to betray me once again. Roxy walked toward the living room, located just off the foyer. We used it for company, for guests, and for those who stopped for casual conversations. We never used it just for us, but this was a special occasion. I followed, watching her walk ahead of me, thinking back to that first time when I watched her walk away, knowing I was going to be seeing her every night from then on. That caused a lump to form in my throat. I swallowed a few times, trying to remove it. Roxy sat down in one of the twin chairs placed in front of a huge fireplace, now quiet. She gestured to the matching one next to her. I took it and sat, facing her. "It's your show, Roxy. I'm here to listen to what you have to say." She nodded, the look on her face one of determination, a look I remembered from many sessions of math and chemistry. It was not a look I had seen since. She raised her eyes to meet mine and started. "First, everything I told you in my email was true. All of it. I love you, and I always have. I never considered anything but that when I was with you. I don't care what you look like or think you look like. I love you, I love what and who you are. Nothing will ever change that. Maybe I never told you that often enough. It was enough for me to know it was true, so maybe I was wrong for that. And I did truly love the way you made love to me. You were the best I ever had, and I loved every minute with you. That I could do that to you was a huge turn-on for me. That man, Roy, was never a threat to you. He was a pathetic man who used my fear and my ignorance to get what he wanted." At this, Roxy stopped, wiped her eyes with a small handkerchief she was gripping with one hand, and looked down at the floor. She seemed to gather herself again and continued. "When I found out I couldn't have a baby, it almost killed me. I took it hard, and it took a long time for me to get past it. You tried to help me, but it was my fault I couldn't accept your help. I thought I had let you down, that you would see it as a failure. You have to understand, Jim, that all I have going for me is my looks. You're the smart one, the confident one, the one that does everything for me. Right from the start, you were the one who helped me to make it through college. Ever since, you've always helped me make decisions. So, when I couldn't even give you a child, my confidence left me. I was scared that you would begin to look elsewhere. That began to eat at me, and I finally convinced myself that you would look for some other woman who could give you the children you wanted. That began to eat away at me, and all I could think was that you didn't need me anymore. That's the way I was feeling when Roy contacted me to tell me the lie that you wanted to divorce me. He somehow knew that I was feeling insecure. He finally came up with the plot to steal your money. I had the crazy thought that it would keep you from going with someone else if you lost your money. It makes no sense to you, Jim, I know, but I wasn't in my right mind at the time. I was panicked, lost, frightened of losing you. Roy used that. He wanted to screw me, just like all the other men I met. I knew that, and I decided to use that to get him to take your money away. I thought that was my only weapon. That was a mistake that I will regret till the day I die." Roxy had to stop again. I decided to get a glass of water to give her since she was becoming agitated. As I listened to her, I felt a small grain of hope grow as the picture she was painting for me began to take shape. It was all true so far, everything I knew and heard from my surveillance. She had made no attempt to lie or change the facts to make her less guilty. That was what impressed me the most. I watched her sip the water, then set the glass aside and turn back to me. I had it with Roy twice, but I faked it both times. He never knew the difference, but he was convinced he was a great lover and that he could get me to go with him when he made the money disappear. I wanted nothing to do with him, but I did want you to be broke long enough that I could convince you not to leave me for another woman who could give you children. Roxy stood, looked down at me and nodded as if to say, "There, I finished what I had to say." I looked back at her, and in that instant, made the decision as to what I was going to do. All that time thinking, planning, conniving, making it as hard on her as I could was not even a factor. As I looked at her face, I knew what I had to do. Actually, deep down inside where the real me lived, I never had a choice. No choice at all. All I had lived through, all I had endured from others, the pain and the loss I suffered, the gifts that God gave me to make up for all of it, all that made my decision easy. Roxy, I have to ask you some questions. Will you answer me honestly? She didn't even hesitate. I will never lie to you again, Jim. I swear to you. Fine. Do you love me, Roxy? Yes, Jim. I love you with all my heart. Do you understand that I have no money now and won't for many years to come? Yes, and I don't care. I have tickets to Costa Rica, to fly down there to consider a job for a couple of guys that want to hire me to work on a project for them. It's not a very nice place to live, but it's what I want. I'm glad that you have someplace you want to go. I'm sure you'll do a very good job for them. They must know that to ask you to come down. Would you come with me if I asked you to? Knowing it would be a very hard life, with none of the luxuries you are used to. I would give up everything if you asked me to. I would go where you go without question. I would never think twice. Would you be my faithful wife there as you weren't here? I will never be with another man as long as I live, even if you don't take me back. This I swear to you. As I said, I had no choice in what I was going to do. I had lived my life as the man others made fun of, that others turned away from in disgust. I was the man who suffered cruelties from those who denigrated others less fortunate than themselves. I was the man who learned to be alone and enjoy his own counsel. I grew up that way and I lived my life without regret until Roxy came into it. From then on, I was a different person. Normal, with a normal life and a beautiful wife who others admired. I was envied for what I had. And I grew to expect it, that I could be normal, one of the normal ones. I had friends, people that came to my home to be with us. Normal in all respects. I said one simple, silent prayer then. It was, please don't take this away again. I looked at Roxy standing in front of me and reached out my hand. Roxy, I want you to come with me. I want you to be by my side for the rest of our lives. Will you do that? She came to me, put her arms around me and squeezed me tightly. Yes, I will. I promise you I will never fail you again. I promise you will never regret this day. Epilogue. That was 5 years and 3 days ago. Roxy and I and our 3 kids came back to the United States yesterday following a phone call from Floyd. It seems that the first of the guaranteed payments went into the special account right on time. That account had a nice sum of money in it already, since it was opened 5 years ago with money from the accounts that were closed on that day. The payments that began at the end of 5 years were very large and would continue without fail. Roxy knew what was in those accounts, but all she said was that it would be nice to start college funds for the kids. It seems that the weather in Costa Rica was very conducive to fertility. Roxy was pregnant less than a month after we moved there and she delivered a beautiful baby girl 9 months later. We had twin girls a year and a half later. Because of the size of our family then, I did borrow some money to buy us a bigger place, and it was still modest by any standard. But we all loved it there and we intended on flying back as soon as we made arrangements. I joined Roxy and the kids in the motel where we were staying. Did you take care of everything okay? She asked when I sank down in one of the deck chairs flanking the pool. It's all taken care of. Floyd is very happy. He's making a nice piece of change for acting on our behalf. Good. When are we leaving? I want to get home as soon as we can leave. I thought you'd like to see the house again, and maybe the places we left behind. Don't you want to spend some of that money? Buy a new home here in the States? Don't be smart. I just want to get home. I think we need to consider a little brother for our 3 girls. What about the money? Aren't you interested in how much we have? No. I just want to go home. But Roxy, we're now worth millions. Don't you want to do things, go places, see the world? I told you, I just want to go back to our home.